Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Continuing through Deuteronomy this morning. I love this portion. It's one of my favorites. I think that a lot about a lot of Deuteronomy, though, because
You must have different subclasses of favorites.
I think I maybe do. They used to tease me when we used to do the Torah portions with the kids in Shabbat school. They used to be like, every portion's your favorite.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not, though. But I do like a lot of it. But this one I really, really love. This one is like actually one of my favorites. And there's some big stuff in here. It's one of those portions that's like, my goodness, there's so much. Because we have, the 10 words and the Shema and all kinds of other things. So, lots to discuss this morning. So, we're picking up at the very end of Deuteronomy 3. And we have this it's interesting this portion starts with, let me back up just a second, because I want us to see this. So the very end of last week's portion, they're talking about the tribes that are going to settle on the other side of the Jordan, right? And then at the very end of last week's portion, in verse 21, we have Joshua. Joshua comes up and it says, I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that Adonai your God has done to these two kings, because it's talking about defeating Sihon and Og. And Adonai will do the same to all the kingdoms you are about to cross into. You must not fear them, for it is Adonai your God who fights for you. So the portion last week ended with Joshua and his role and what he's going to do, and then we kind of jump back to the beginning of this week's portion of Moses being like, can I please go in the land with everybody? And of course we already know the answer to that. We already know that the Lord said he could not enter the land because he didn't do what he said, and he was taking credit for giving the people water from the rock. So he doesn't get to go in the land. But then at the very end of this, it goes back again at the very end of chapter 3 in verse 28. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will cross over before this people, and he will enable them to inherit the land that you will see. So we kind of have this little kind of Moses pleading to go with the people, surrounded by, but Joshua's actually the one who's going to do it. Joshua is the one who's been installed as the leader for this season and this purpose. So in the midst of this, we talked about last week about Deuteronomy really being this kind of, Moses's last remarks to the people before he dies and they enter the land. And it's very much this retelling of the Torah. It's very much this, okay, we've come this far. You're about to actually enter the land and inherit what God has promised you. So this is why it's important that you remember all these things, right? So in the midst of Moses really wanting to go, we have this, no, it's Joshua who's been appointed. And then the portion kind of shifts into a lot of why it's so important that they listen, and recounting some of the giving of the Torah and stuff like that. And I really want us to spend some time on that. But before we move on, anybody have any comments about this little insert of Moses wanting to enter the land with the people? Yeah.
Kind of teaches us that even Moses, who God used so mightily, and he interceded on Israel's behalf so many times, so he got what he wanted. Even Moses doesn't always get what he wants every time. But
yeah.
Even big things, God might bless us with a lot of good things and big things, but we need to be always ready that not my will, but your will be done. So I guess kind of this connection with Yeshua, I guess, that Yeshua was in the garden pleading that, if it be your will, may this come pass from me, may I not have to go through this
That's good.
torture and sacrifice. And so kind of connects, I guess, Moses and Yeshua in a way.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I like how his last words were, "You've seen the goodness of the Lord, so don't be afraid when you go." I mean, you've already seen his good works. So when you go into the land, don't be afraid of anything that's going to come and happen, because he's always there with you. So don't look at what you think is in front of you, but remember the greatness that's behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I always kind of felt that it may have been a little harsh to deny him that privilege, but then I looked at it from a kid's perspective. An hour can be an eternity if you're waiting on something. And from God's perspective, it's like, come on, man, another 15 minutes and you can go to someplace even better. So just, chill.
I'm always just a little struck by it. It seems like it shows the humanity, and to me even the validity of Scripture, where you see Moses' blame shift in this, like because of you. And it's kind of like all the way back to the garden with this woman is, So we always see this little bit of you get to see the good, the bad, the ugly, and stuff like that. So you get to see this little bit of blame shifting, where at this, it's like Moses is telling the people, it's your fault that I don't get to go in.
Yeah.
And it's, which in a sense, it's like, well, you made me so angry. I mean, there are times it's like, you want to walk everything out perfectly, and other people cause stuff to come out and stuff to come up that you didn't want to. And was Moses really tired of dealing with this by this point in time? Yeah, but again, he didn't represent God well. And you think of how many times when you're put in a conflict situation and then you walk out of it and go, man, God, I just didn't represent you well in this because my emotions got the best of me.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see that a little bit, like Moses is going because of you guys, but God's saying to Moses, no, you're still responsible for your actions.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think seeing Moses' humanity is really important, right? And we've talked about this before, of just like the fact that, it does say that Moses was like God to the people, but he's not God, right? And so, and he can't be revered as such. And one of the, many scholars, many commentators, many whatever theologians bring up this idea of like, if Moses had gone in the land with them, then it's very possible that he could have become worshipped like a god. Or it's like, well, with Moses, we don't have Moses, we can't continue. And it's like, that's very much not true, and it's not the reality. It's not how God wanted the people to live. He wants the people to realize that God is in control, is actually the head of the people, right? And not these men that are put in as leaders. And then that's why we also talked about, we start to see with Joshua and then the priest, we start to see kind of some more separation of leadership, and we continue to see that as we go, and how they fulfill these roles that no one, Moses is unique in that he fulfills a role and has a place that no one else really does, because it was needed for that time. But then moving forward, they need to be able to hear the Lord through this combination of other people. Yeah.
It's an interesting perspective, but given his history with these people, I think it was very unlikely that they would have revered him as a god of sorts. They never had before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see that too. I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like I don't know, like the Choose Your Own Adventure books. It's like you can, whenever I read one of those, it's like, yeah, I would go through it once, but then I'm like, but I want to know what the other options were. So you go and, read the other options. So it's almost like I wish I had your, Choose Your Own Adventure of well, what if Moses did go? What would happen is, if they do go in the land with Moses, does it go too far? Is that the tipping point? I don't know. Maybe not. It would be interesting to see how that would play out, I think.
He was super old.
And he was super old. Because it's going to tell us by the end of Deuteronomy that he lived to 120 years. So he's old. And he's like, his eyesight is failing and all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, the comment about what if, I read an article on what if the Jewish leaders in Yeshua's day had received him as king of the Jews, and how that could have played out. And it's really an interesting article because, as us that know the story, it's kind of, well, didn't he have to die? Didn't he have to die? And if they received him?
Right.
Spoiler alert, I guess, is that
Yeah.
the Romans would not
Right.
have put up with the Jews instituting him, bringing him up as king. So that does play out in an interesting way, and this article just brings all these prophetic, writings into it that are really pretty amazing. Another comment I've been thinking recently about the verse that says later on, forget exactly where it's at, that's shows in Deuteronomy that God will raise up a brother amongst you and listen to him. And of course we point to him as being Yeshua. But I thought about, if somebody argued with me at that point, if they would say, well, no, that was Joshua. And of course you could say, I think all the sages say that Torah is written in chronological order, things jump around, but here it does say, it seems like the people knew, and it does say here that Joshua will be their leader. So in that verse later, when he says, here raise up brethren, they kind of already knew that if it was Joshua, why didn't he specifically say Joshua at that point? So anyway, I'm just trying to, if I was having a discussion with someone about this.
Well, and it also talks about at the very end of Deuteronomy, though, it says, and there has never again been a prophet like Moses.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which most people connect with what you're saying is like, then it'll raise up. And so at the time that the Torah was completed, so to speak, the nation of Israel had not recognized another person who fulfilled the same role that Moses did. And then, of course, but that's where then we connect with Yeshua, so many things that he says. And even the Father saying when Yeshua is immersed, well, I think one gospel has it when he's immersed and another one has it at the Mount of Transfiguration, but like, this is my son, you must listen to him, connects back to that, and when, when this brother or this prophet or this person like me, however you want to translate it there, is risen up, you must listen to him. And so it's interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think, but either way, we're seeing, of course, like there's this continued emphasis that Joshua is taking the mantle, and Joshua is the one in the position of authority as they move forward. And it's important that the people regard him that way, right? Because God has appointed him. And we've talked before about how, the significance of God appointing leaders of the people of Israel instead of being like elected officials or something like that, because things tend to get messy when, not that they're not going to get messy anyway, but when people are in charge of it. Okay, well, let's continue on. So chapter 4, I think Deuteronomy 4 is like one of my favorite chapters. I have a lot of it marked up. So, because I think what I love about it is just this, like, I just feel this, like, because this is Moses speaking to the people still, and he's kind of recounting this story, and there's some interesting ways that he says some things that are different, not contrary, but different than how it's recorded previously, and we can talk about that and why that is. There's some of those things in the 10 words as well, which are really interesting to look at. But he's really emphasizing, like, you have to, like, stay diligent. It's to me, it's this very much like obedience to the Lord and trusting in him is an intentional, active pursuit. You can't just follow God by chance, right? It doesn't just happen, right? There has to be intention. You have to be intentional about it, because it even starts the beginning of chapter 4. I'm just gonna pull a couple things out. We can go back and talk about whatever we want to, but I just want to show you something. So it's we start out, listen to the statutes and ordinances that I'm teaching you to do. Also, I think somewhere in maybe it's chapter 5. It's chapter 5. I was thinking it is what the verse numbering got different, but it's chapter 5. So never mind, we should be good. So starting out chapter 4, listen to the statutes and ordinances that I'm teaching you to do, so that you may live in and go in and possess the land that Adonai, the God of your fathers, is giving to you. So there's a couple things that show up. Generational things and the intentionality or the vigilance against moving away from God. Skipping down to verse 9, only be watchful and watch over your soul closely, so you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, and they slip from your heart all the days of your life. Verse 15, so be watchful over your soul, since you saw no form on that day. This is talking about Sinai at this point, or on Horeb, I guess. Horeb, it's an interesting Horeb-Sinai thing, whatever. But be watchful over your souls, since you saw no form on that day that Adonai spoke to you in the midst of the fire. And then verse 23, watch yourselves so that you do not forget the covenant of Adonai your God, which he cut with you, and make for yourselves a graven image. Which then, we're going to come back to this because there's a next section there that's really interesting. And let's see if I'm trying to see if there's another one. But you see my point probably. He's multiple times in this speech here saying, watch over your soul, watch over yourselves, make sure that you don't forget, which tends to suggest to us that they are at risk of forgetting, right? Mm-hmm. It's like he knows the nature of humanity or something. So he's recounting this story and being like, you have to remember, you have to make sure that you don't forget. You have to make sure that you know where you came from, because it's setting you up for where you're going. So the beginning of chapter 4, he's telling them, make sure that you don't forget what you've seen. Don't make sure, and even verse 9 that we already read, that's the one of the be watchful and watch over your soul so you don't forget. You are to make them known to your children and your children's children. The day that you stood before Adonai your God in Horeb, Adonai said to me, gather the people to me, and I will make them hear my words, so that they learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and so that they teach their children. So it's very much, and of course, by this point, we're near the end of the wilderness, right? Most of the first generation has died out. He's talking to the second generation. He's talking to the generation that's going to enter into the land. So he's telling them it's important that you continue doing this, because covenantal faithfulness it's not enough for the previous generation to be faithful and to uphold the commandments. If it doesn't continue, then essentially the previous generation has failed. Actually, the author of this book is called The Torah Story. He brings up this. It's like you actually can judge the success of a generation by the faithfulness of the next one, which is why it's so important that we are thinking about the next generation, both just natural children and also just others in the community and things like that, because bringing up a generation is a community thing, and making sure that they know why, and it talks more about that later. We can continue talking about that. But he's really starting off being like, it's important that you remember it, and it's important that you teach your children. So then we get this retelling of getting the 10 words and the Torah at, this is calling it Horeb, it's Sinai, whatever. And so and again, it's talking about how important it is that they remember, that they teach their children. And then it comes, and we go back to some blame shifting in verse 21. Adonai was angry with me because of your words, and he swore that I would not cross over the Jordan or enter the good land that Adonai your God is giving you for an inheritance. I must die in this land, not crossing over the Jordan. But you will cross over and take possession of that good land. And then this is a really interesting section. I'm in verse 23 of chapter 4. Watch yourselves so that you do not forget the covenant of Adonai your God, which he cut with you, and make for yourselves a graven image in the form of anything that Adonai your God has forbidden you. For Adonai your God is a consuming fire and a jealous God. Very next verse. When you father children and children's children and have been in the land a long time, and you act corruptly and make a graven image in the form of anything, and do evil in the sight of Adonai your God, provoking him to anger. I'm going to pause there. I know it's in the middle of a sentence, but it's like he's going from this, immediately from this, make sure that you don't worship other gods, to when you do, right? And it's like, he doesn't even give him the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't even say, and if, some of you are, enticed away, or if a portion of you, or if by chance, it's like, no, when you do this, when you fail. And that feels a little discouraging.
He's lived with it for 40 years.
He has, right? And what is a situation that was really not so long ago where we saw this happen? Think about, it's my birth portion. Those of you who know what my birth portion is. Think about Phineas. Mm-hmm. Think about Phineas and the, now I'm going to say it wrong.
Worship of Baal.
Yes. Is it the Midianites or the Moabites?
Well, they're both.
They're both.
It's both.
The Midianites and the Moabites. The people they're not supposed to intermix with, right? We just, in our reading, and really in the passage of time, if we were to line it out, it's not so far in their past that this just happened, right? And so it's like, we'd like to think that we'd all learn our lesson from the previous generation and have to repeat it, and Stan's reaction is telling us that is a naive view. And so he's warning them. But what I love about it, I'm going to keep reading and then we can have other comments, but I want to give the whole thing before we talk about it more. So, provoking him to anger. When you act corruptly, make graven images. He's angry. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will certainly be carried off quickly from the land you are crossing over the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days on it, for you will certainly be destroyed. Adonai will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where Adonai will drive you. There you will serve man-made gods of wood and stone, which do not see or hear or eat or smell. But from there you will seek Adonai your God, and you will find him when you seek him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. So I love this, despite its initially discouraging pattern that it's showing of, as much as we would like to believe that humanity is capable of being obedient, we're typically not. And but that doesn't destroy God's covenantal faithfulness to his people. Because as strongly and as pointedly as he's saying, you will turn from me, or you will turn from God, this is Moses speaking, so not to Moses, but so you will turn from God, he's saying, God will hear you and will bring you back. So from this section, it's like, as challenging as it is, it's like God is, and actually I'm going to read the next little section too, because it kind of completes it. When you are in distress all these days, and all these things have come on you, in the latter days you will return to Adonai your God and listen to his voice. For Adonai your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them. So that is like the really important thing. If you stop just at the you're going to be unfaithful and he's going to scatter you, he's going to cast you out of the land, and you stop there, then that's a really depressing message, right? It's really hopeless. But when you include the covenantal faithfulness of God, that he's like, he will not forget his people. He will not break his covenant. He will not, as replacement theology would like us to believe, say, you missed it, I'm moving on to someone else. He will draw them back. And it may take some time, and it may be a very painful process, and we've seen that play out through history. But He will keep His people. The fact that the Jewish people exist on the earth is a testimony to the fact that He is covenantally faithful. With as much as with as many times as people have tried to wipe them out and been unsuccessful, that He is a covenantally faithful God. And so I think that that's encouraging and can help drive our intercession even for Israel even now.
Well,
Yeah.
even with the scattering, they still were not completely assimilated by other groups.
Exactly.
The whole fact that they still exist and their identity still exists is huge. Because, I could say, well, I live in America and, I'm Irish, but that's not the same thing as the full identity of what Judaism meant. I mean, this was not what you were born, this is your devotion to God.
Mm-hmm.
You're Irish? But I didn't know that when I married you.
Yeah.
I think in verse 21, another point that goes along with that is that my thought on the fact that Moses was blame shifting, can I propose a different thought? He said, furthermore, Jehovah was angry with me for your sakes. I think that word is a conjunction, and I've looked into this before, and I don't think it's because you were like this to me. I think he's saying he was angry with me because of what I did to you. For your sakes, he was angry with me. And it was for the people's sake, because he did what was wrong, and he was trying to show the people that Moses did something wrong, and leadership wasn't supposed to do that. For your sakes, he did this. And so I think that even ties in the whole thought that the nation of Israel was the entire purpose of what was going on there. So it kind of takes the shift off of leadership, not fully, but in a way it kind of shifts it back to the purpose. His people have to keep going through. And I think that Moses understood that and then put that into the thoughts, into the rest of it. Or he's telling them, raise up your children now. Raise them up because he is there for you.
Yeah, I think it's a both and. I think it's he's in some ways of being like, you guys were so terrible that I got angry, and I think he's also like, I think it's kind of both, because this GLV translates it furthermore. Adonai was angry with me because of your words, so it's kind of this like, it could also be thought of as like, he was angry, God was angry because I couldn't keep you in mind or something, I don't know. And so there's all these pieces to it. There's all these ways to look at it. And there's a lot of wrestle in it. I always feel a lot of tension when I see these portions about Moses and entering the land, because it's like he clearly wants to go in. He wants to see the fulfillment of everything that he's worked for. And he has to wrestle through the fact that he's not going to get to, even if he does understand why.
Yeah, there's this tension between the fact that God gives us free will, he gives us commandments, we're to do them, but he has a purpose in you not doing them. Like, I have to admit, I don't really understand that much about what Paul is exactly saying, but it seems like he's saying that because of the leadership, the Jewish leadership, I'm going to bring the news of Yeshua to the nations in a way that maybe it couldn't have happened if it just been through this small people group. It had to, even though it, went awry in different places and different things, it's still God's purpose to use man's free will to fulfill his purposes.
For sure.
And so it's not like, God didn't see this coming, So God is faithful to Israel, even when they've rejected me. There'll be consequences, and I'll use other people's evil free will to fulfill those punishments. But like you said, God is faithful. He's made this covenant with Israel that cannot be broken. He's covenant faithfulness, Hesed, and so yeah, it's gonna work out.
Exactly, because like what, like, so again, imagine for a second that they somehow were capable of being completely faithful when they enter the land. They go in, they wipe out all the people they're supposed to wipe out, they live according to the Torah perfectly for the rest of time. Is it possible that, okay, now I'm not challenging the sovereignty of God. Like, God can do what he wants. Like, God has a way. But imagine like this people group stays in their land, just happy little people in the land of Israel all by themselves. Do you think that the nations see as much, or do you think if they're just there doing their own thing, it's more possible? And I'm way oversimplifying this, but it's like then it's like all the rest of the nations are doing what they want. But what happens when they're scattered and they, like Lori was mentioning, they still keep their identity? It causes everyone around them to take note, right? Everyone around them notices something about them, that they're not just assimilating into these other nations. You know, they're faithfully keeping tradition and identity alive while they're intermixed with all these other people. Because, right, coming back to Israel's calling, primary calling is to be a light to the nations. So even through their disobedience, I think the Lord uses that, kind of like what you're saying, to allow them to be a light to the nations from within the nations. And then I think what would be nice is if we saw them then when they are restored back to the land, that it is this continued, like, you know, this even bigger testimony to the rest of the nations of how faithful God is. Of course, it's not always interpreted that way, hence war forever and always. But it is meant to be this testimony of a light to the nations, even through these seasons of disobedience, because God is so covenantally faithful to them. And we can keep talking about that, but I want to add in the next piece. I want to bring in the next piece because I feel like it kind of addresses some of that. Verse 32. Indeed, ask now about the former days that were before you, from the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of the sky to the other. Has there ever been such a great thing as this, or has anything like it been heard? Has a people ever heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire, as you have heard, and lived? Or has any God ever tried to come and take for himself a nation from within a nation, by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, like all that Adonai your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? You were shown so that you might know that Adonai is God, there is no other besides him. From the heavens he made you hear his voice to instruct you, and on earth he caused you to see his great fire. You heard his words from the midst of the fire. Because he loved your fathers, he chose their descendants after them, and he brought you out from Egypt with his presence by his great power to drive out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance, as it is today. So I feel like Moses is exhorting Israel, being like, no other God has ever done this. And you have to remember that, you have to teach it to your children, and you have to make it known to the nations. You have to make it known that this God is not like any other God. It's not that you've just chosen the God out of the lineup that is doing the best things for you. You've chosen the God of the universe, the one true God, who does things that no other God can do. And you're supposed to live in the reality of that is the God who you serve, and that is the God who's made covenant with you. And that should mean something. It should inform how you live. It should inform, it should give you confidence, I would think, right? Even like he's talking about, because he knows their fear. He knows, because obviously he remembers the time when they sent the spies, and they're like, there's no way. There's no way we can overtake these people. And he's like, yes, you can. And he's given them, we talked about last week, he's given them an example of that. Like when they defeated Sihon and Og, when they were like, you know, like God, they won because God was with them. Not because they were the best military ever. They're probably a terrible military. They've been slaves for 400 years. Like they don't know how to fight wars. So it's like these big passionate moments of like, this is why I love to come back and read these portions, and I'm like, man, look at who God is. Like, look at how he identifies himself. He's identifying himself with this people, but he's also just doing things that are like stand out so much from all the other nations and all the other gods and cultures, even at the time. It's pretty remarkable. So anything else about that stand out to people before we read my favorite verse, I think, in the whole portion? Yeah.
I think it's just amazing how much he takes. And if you look at all the things that they did, going through all of history, how many times they rejected him, and he said, please come back. Please listen to me. Please come back. And he'd send another prophet. Please come back. Listen to me. I love you. Please come back. He had so much, I don't know, concreteness, firmness in his love that, and then we think about ourselves and how we are toward others. Sometimes it's just like, wow, like, is there any way that we could even remotely show that love when somebody hurts us like that, that we could turn around and say, I love you though. Please, let's do the right thing. Please, let's do the right thing. I just think that in our walk, it's so encouraging to see that there really is an example of that out there, and that's what we're needing to become like. That just how steadfast he is in showing love and truth, and trying to walk in it, and trying to get others to walk in truth too. It's just amazing to see how great he is in that.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah.
I was talking to a Chabad friend, and got to share with him that historically in my life, well, part of the problem was I just read the New Testament. I didn't read the Tanakh, because I just thought it was lots of stories that didn't really matter. And so I shared with my friend that once I came to realize the covenant that God had made with Israel and the promises and faithfulness, and then look at the Jewish people and see their existence, and even this amazing thing, this first fruits of the kingdom, that there is actually, they are being brought back and they live in the land. I always struggled with, you can't, you just gotta kind of believe there's a God because there's no evidence. You can't really see him, where is God? You just have to believe. I do believe in Revelation, so there's an element of that that's true, but, and choice. But I'm so thankful that now, once my paradigm got shifted, okay, yeah, the Torah is amazing, and it's got all this stuff, and the Tanakh, and about the promises of God and God's faithfulness, and so forth. So I got to share with my friend that, I can look at you, I can look at the people, your brother in Israel, and see that God made promises, that they'd be disciplined, but that he's fulfilling his promises too. So I can physically look at something, and I don't have to tell somebody that doesn't believe in God that we just have to kind of, believe that he's there. Look at these, look at what not just any God, but the God of the Bible, the God of Hashem, the God of Israel. So you can see, quote, reality and what the Bible promised and the connection there. So to me, that's been a total revolution in my faith to believe in Bible, because I can physically see how God has been faithful.
Yeah, because to your point, it's like if you start with the Gospels, when the Gospels are, obviously we need to be studying the Gospels, right? We need to know the life of Yeshua. But when you have Torah as your foundation, you realize that there's already been so much covenantal faithfulness displayed. It's not just Yeshua coming and being like, all right, we tried once and now we're redoing the whole thing, right?
Right.
He's the living Torah. Like, he actually came to be like, no, what God said in the beginning is still true. There's just more than you ever knew, and his presence can be with you again. And there's a greater level, we talk about this progressive revelation throughout history, and the coming of the Messiah is the greatest progress of that revelation, I think, but it doesn't, and again, going back to like what we talked about before, when he's interacting with Pharisees, with Torah scholars, he's not saying what you believe and what you're studying is wrong. It's your heart in it is wrong, and how you're teaching people to live just to have this display of righteousness is wrong. It's about your heart and about connecting with the Lord and about your motivation for what you're doing that needs to be connected. And he did it, and he brought this, because he was a man, because he came in humanity, he humbled himself and came in humanity and was able to show it through relationship at a greater level. I think this is all very relational too, but I think that his having a human example of God made flesh, interacting with people and seeing the humanity and the mercy and how that his mercy and compassion and kindness comes out, even his anger comes out in a pure way as a human, is so helpful for us to understand the heart of God. But it's not a new thing. It's how how God's character always has been. And that's why I even draw like I was talking about last week, the parallel between even Deuteronomy and Acts, of like Deuteronomy is taking, okay, you've been given the Torah, this is how you live in light of that revelation you've been given, and Acts is very much, okay, the Messiah has come, the Holy Spirit has been poured out at the very beginning of Acts. This is how you live in light of that, right? It's this exhortation into, you've been given this big piece of revelation, and the Lord, like, you are now called to live by that, and this is how you do it. So it's important, right? And it also goes back to remembering, and even thinking about in Acts. One of the things I love in Acts is when Peter is speaking multiple times, when Stephen is martyred, they're telling the story of the Torah. They're using, as they're speaking to those who are coming against them and they're being persecuted, they're still going back to the Torah, perfectly connected with Yeshua, right? So it's modeling this, like, it's not that this is going away, it's that Yeshua has brought this new fullness to it and this new understanding of what it means to live that out now that the Messiah has come and the Holy Spirit has been poured out. Okay, before I get too excited any further, any other comments?
Well, just because we're going into the Word of the commandments, we see in the very beginning of chapter 4, you must not add to the word that I'm commanding you or take away from it. And then we have again in Revelation that exact same warning in Revelation 22. There's a consequence to it. And so here Moses is telling them, when you go into the land, if you violate this, there's a consequence. And then in the book of Revelation, it's like, and all these plagues are going to be added onto you. There is a consequence.
For sure.
So the importance of not distorting, not neglecting, to take the word as the word. And, I know that, and I don't want to get into the oral law so much where they build the hedges and stuff, but the importance of, you can't really pick and choose on this. And a lot of people do. They pick this one I'm comfortable with, this one makes me uncomfortable. And here he's just like, you need to do this so that you can have this, and if you don't do this, this is what happens. And it feels like that's a lot of the theme of it. Get the consequences down. Realize that I have something really good for you, and if you reject it, it's not going to go well.
So I'm gonna add this next part on. We can continue to talk about this because I like this. But verse 39. So this is after, of course, he's talked. He's been exhorting them. Like, you have to remember that he's this God who's like no other. And he says it. He says, so you will know today and take to heart that Adonai, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. There is no other. You must keep his statutes and his mitzvot, which I am commanding you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, so that you may prolong your days in the land that Adonai your God is giving you for all time. So it's like, within Israel's calling to be a light to the nations, they can only be a light to the nations if they have the full revelation and knowledge that they are serving the one true God. There is no other God like him, right? It's kind of like, it's not just something that preaches well. It's like it has to be your known reality, or it doesn't impact anyone else, right? So he's exhorting them, and it's like, you have to remember all this. You have to obey these commandments from a place of knowing that he is the one true God, and that, and then it goes with all the consequences that we see throughout all of this, of the when you're faithful, you'll receive all these blessings, and when you're not, you receive these consequences. But the consequences are always given in the context, just like we saw previously in this chapter, of the when you fall away, when you follow these other gods, I will call you back. And there's another section later on in Deuteronomy that I really love, that's this blessing and curse kind of section that is talking about, like, that kind of goes through layers of it. And when you're disobedient, I'll allow this to happen. But if you turn back, but then when you don't and you go on and do, I'm going to have to allow this to happen, but so that you come back. It's always like, so that you turn back. It's not just, if you don't listen, I'm going to punish you because I want to punish you. It's because you have to feel the consequences of your choices, right? That's how it works out. This whole perfect God and free will thing works out, is you have to feel the consequences of those choices so that you turn back and realize that he is who he says he is. I want to connect this really quick, because I do want to talk a little bit about the 10 words and the Shema, but I'm going to skip that for a second just to kind of tie something together here. So as we've been looking through this, of course, we've talked about this generational nature of making it so important that they pass this on to their children intentionally. And towards the end of our portion this week, at the end of chapter 6, in chapter 6, verse 20, it even addresses this more specifically. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, what are the testimonies and the statutes and ordinances that Adonai our God commanded you? Then you are to tell your son, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Adonai brought us out from Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes Adonai showed signs and wonders great and terrible on Egypt, on Pharaoh, and on all his house. Then he brought us out from there so that he might bring us in to give us the land that he swore to our fathers. Adonai commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear Adonai our good, for our good always, to keep us alive, as is the case this day. It will be righteousness to us if we take care to do all this commandment before Adonai our God, just as he commanded us. So he's emphasizing the importance of, like, it's not just when your kids ask, why do we do this? It's like, well, it's just what we've always done. Right? And some of us have traditions like that. And that's not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but like, I think we all have things within our families. It's like, our family always does this. It's like, well, why do you do that? I'm like, I don't know. It's just what we've always done. But that's not going to cut it with this, right? It's like, he's emphasizing this. It's like, when your son asks, and I think in the very practical, because this actually comes, and we skipped over it, but this is coming right after the Shema, where it's even, it's talking about, these words which I command you today are to be on your heart. You're to teach them to your children. Speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. They're a sign on your hand. All these things. I think in the very practical, it's like as ritual develops, as practices develop, which we need, right? We need those things to keep. They become identity markers. They become important. But as these things are happening, and as children ask questions, as children do, there has to be an answer that points to the truth of who God is. Meaning, which I think is twofold. I think it's also like, yes, it passes it on to the next generation, but it's like, if you have to teach that to your children, then it needs to be true for you as well. So I think it's to keep it alive in the heart of, in this case, the parent or the older generation, of this is why we're doing this. I'm not just doing it because I've always done it. I'm doing it because God delivered my people from Israel. And teaching that to the children, so that then that is what becomes ingrained in their hearts. It's like, we do this because God delivered our people from Egypt, not from Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, that speaks to the Haggadah, the Passover
Yeah,
Seder,
Mhm.
that
Very much.
imagine Israel, the Jewish people got that got developed over time in response to this, you know,
Mhm.
that, well, maybe your son won't ask you the question, so there needs to be a time every year where they do.
Right.
Or they have asked the question, they kind of know it, but it's good to reinforce. And that's what I love about the Torah cycle every year. I'm a slow learner. I got to learn things, repetition. So I love that we go through the Torah every year. It's repeated. It's new every morning because I'm different and, you know, new perspective. God has something new to say. That's still old, that's still there. So, yeah, I just, you know, the whole generation. You mentioned something earlier about, you know, the proof of, I don't know, they use this phrase, the proof of the pudding is, you know, how do the children then, how do they respond? I heard someone make the case that it's even greater, how does the grandchildren respond? You know, how did you pass this on? And I'm not throwing stones because I have 2 boys and issues and things. So, but just as a goal and as a prayer that we can pass on to our children, and then even more, they pass it on to their children. And so, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Glory.
I like that you brought this out because it's like sometimes as parents and you tell your kid not to do something and they say why and you say because I said so.
Yeah.
You know, but the Lord isn't dealing with his people like that. It goes
Mhm.
beyond the just because I said so.
Right.
He's giving them very good practical. I mean, Moses is laying out here. It's more than just because God said don't do it. I mean, which you should be obedient if God just says don't do
Sure.
it. But it's his kindness and graciousness to show you
Mm-hmm.
the extent of why he's asking you not to do that too,
Yeah, absolutely.
or to do something.
Right,
The
exactly.
benefits of it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is good.
No, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that stood out to me while I was reading it in chapter 4, when it's like make them known to your children and your children's children. So like the role of grandparents is
Mhm.
actually to answer these questions, and I just thought that was really sweet to think of the family perspective that we need our grandparents. Like
Mhm.
grandparents are important, and sometimes the parents will miss how to answer the question because we're exasperated and because we said so.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Whereas the grandparent's gonna be like, let's go get ice cream and let me tell you how we got freed from Egypt.
Yeah.
But seriously, right?
Yeah. And so I mean, and both are necessary at different points. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, but I mean, I don't know. It just really stood out to me that the role of a grandparent is really important to be able to pass down truths in that light. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And as we get older, you know, the height, the breadth, the width of God's wisdom and word just becomes more, we just begin to grasp it more. And so there is this element of wisdom of learning from our own mistakes and just life, and it just touches me to see how rich the Lord's word is, that it, you know, his word is simple enough for the youngest child but complex enough for the greatest mind.
Right. Yeah, and there is just this brilliance to generations. It's like I don't remember what I was reading or listening to, but somewhere along the way I read or listened to something that was making the point that it's like some of us are still at the point where it's like we have in some level access to, or at least received memory of like a century, like over the course of a century. So it's like I think about on my mom's, so I know more of the family histories on my mom's side. So my maternal grandmother was born in 1917. So just from stories I heard from her life, I have back to the early 1900s. But then she would tell me stories about her parents immigrating from Sweden, and they were born in the 1800s.
Wow.
So I have received memory back to the 1800s,
Wow.
even though I'm living right now in 2025. right? And so it's like, so keeping those stories and those histories alive, and some of the, and it helps give meaning to traditions, I think, and like it applies here too, right? So it's like, and I think that can cross even from families. And I have to say this just because I don't have my own family. So sometimes I'm like, I don't get to teach my children right now. Maybe someday, but I don't have that. But I'm like, but I hope that I can have some impact on my friends' kids, and I can learn from, you know, those older than me in the congregation, and I learn from my friends, and I learn, you know, I get to learn, you know, like that's why I love like intergenerational small groups, is I'm like, I want us to like, it's like, I need those kids. I need to teach in Shabbat school because I need to learn from them, and hopefully they can learn something from me. And it's like, I need to sit and talk with people who are older, you know, the generation ahead of me, because we need all of that. We're shaped into whole people by having cross-generational interactions. Do you have something?
Our family came to this understanding about 14 years ago, and we've been walking a journey all by ourselves. Not totally by ourselves. We actually try to go through the Feast of Sukkot, and we met many great friends there that are scattered throughout Missouri. But we live really far. We live over an hour away. So then there's not many other people that believe like us there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I come from, it was just my mom. So I understand when I'm trying to teach my kids the Torah, I understand how important it is to have people who are older in the mix, because it's not just that there's somebody else that they can teach, but it's also a backing for you and what you're saying. Like if somebody else comes along and says the same thing that you're saying, it's like, oh, it's not just my mom,
Yeah.
or it's not just my dad.
Yeah.
Because there's other people that actually understand this too, and when they give their testimonies and their witnesses of Yeshua and how he worked throughout all of time, throughout all of our Bible, and how everybody brings in their statements about their faith through the, you know, in the Old Testament as well. There's just this beautiful corroboration that helps children to be able to understand, oh, even like for us who's really way out there, that this is the truth. This is what it is. This is life.
Mm-hmm.
It brings us life when we do this. And you can't have that just pop out of nowhere. It
Yeah.
has to be traveled down through, so our faith is that old. It has to go through older people to come down. And so even though you may not be our relatives, in the faith you are. So being able to hear as you speak about your faith, it's really important, because my kids have now heard it through your mouths. So it's not even just of your own grandparents, it's those who
For
carry
sure.
the faith and are older too.
Mm-hmm.
So just that
Yeah.
aspect for you.
Yeah, that's so good. Good. Okay, I do want to talk a little bit about the 10 words. I feel like I always get to this portion and it's like, I get so excited about everything else, I never actually talk about the 10 words, which are like the most well-known part of it, and the Shema, but I don't know if we'll get to the Shema, to be honest, but we'll talk about the 10 words at least a little bit. So it's interesting to look at how the 10 words are given in Deuteronomy, because this is, of course, the second time the Torah is recording the 10 words. The first time is back in Exodus 20, when Moses, of course, receives them at Sinai. But there are a couple of interesting, slightly different ways that they're presented here, and it's kind of interesting to look at some of those. So I thought we would just go through that a little bit. So it starts out as he's kind of introducing this. We have a hero Israel. It's not the Shema hero Israel, but in chapter 5, verse 1, Moses called, and I do think that there's a verse numbering difference somewhere in chapter 5. So if I say a verse and it's not where it is, go back or forward one or something. You should. It's close. But in verse 1, Moses called to all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I'm speaking in your hearing today. Learn them and make sure to do them." So continuing his exhortation to know and to do these things. Adonai our God has cut a covenant with us in Horeb, not with our fathers, has Adonai cut this covenant, but with us, all of us alive here today, Adonai spoke with you face to the face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. And he gives this. But I was standing between you and Adonai at that time to tell you the word of Adonai, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up to the mountain. Because remember, the people were like, we can't. You gotta go. We are gonna die if we go into his presence. And really, they're probably not wrong, but but he's still making the point is like they were still there, and they still heard, they still saw the mountain shake. They saw that God was present on the mountain. So it's still a reality for them, and it's also bringing. But again, this is the second generation, so it's also bringing to attention again this like God kind of makes almost renews his covenant with every generation, and we actually continue to see that as we go through the rest of the Tanakh. In the generations and the kings and the leaders that are faithful and those that are not. But every time, there's been a season of unfaithfulness and and then we have a faithful leader, like we almost see this renewing of covenant type of situation take place. So it is an every generation thing. It's like, again, like we said before, it's not you can't just rely on the ones before you. Eventually it has to become your own, right? So then we get into the actual 10 words. And so it begins with, I am Adonai your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. So in Jewish tradition, that is the first of the 10 words, because in Jewish tradition they call it the 10 words, not the 10 commandments. And it's interesting to look at how different traditions number them, and you can look into some of that. It's interesting.
With Roman numerals.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And this 5 was on this tablet, and this. No, I'm just kidding. Most likely because of how. Fun fact. If I were with the kids, I would call this Bible nerd candy. But it's actually more understood that actually the 2 tablets were actually 2 of the same. It was like God's copy of the covenant and the people's copy of the covenant is one interpretation. So it's not like these 5, and so because some people are like these 5 are grouped this way because of this, and these 5 are this way because of the, it's like, or it's like it's not 5 and 5. It's whatever. And I'm like, I don't, like I call it Bible candy because it's like, does it change how we interact with this? Not really. But it's interesting to think about how that actually kind of worked out.
So in business, you give a copy.
Right,
and you
exactly.
keep a copy.
Exactly. Because it's a legal document is really what's happening here. Covenants are actually legal documents. So Jewish tradition, what?
Would it be understood as a ketubah?
The 10 words?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know that there might be other examples that are better as far as a ketubah, but that's not a bad. Yeah, it could be. I've never thought about it quite that way. But yeah, probably. Makes sense. Okay, so it starts out with this identity statement of God, though. And again, reminding them that he is the God who brought them out of Egypt. And the first several I'm going to go through quickly because they're essentially the same in both tellings or both recordings of them. And I want to talk more about the differences since we only have a couple minutes. So, do not make graven images. We've talked about all of that. So when we get down to Shabbat is where we see a difference in how this is communicated. So in TLV Jewish translation, it's verse 12. It might be something else somewhere else. But verse 12, observe Yom Shabbat to keep it holy, as Adonai your God commanded you. 6 days you are to labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is Shabbat to Adonai your God. In it you are not to do any work, not your son or your daughter, or your slave or your maid, or your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the outsider within your gates, so that your slave and your maid may rest as you do. You must remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Adonai your God commanded you to keep your Shabbat, to keep Yom Shabbat. So, it's saying at the very end here, it's kind of seeming like it's saying, you're supposed to remember that you were a slave and that you've been delivered and brought out by God, and so that you observe the Shabbat. Does anybody remember in Exodus what the reasoning is given for why you keep Shabbat?
Creation.
So does this mean that Shabbat has nothing to do with creation? No, it's not how this works, right? But it is interesting because and it's even the difference in the words of like in Exodus it says remember the Shabbat, and in Deuteronomy it says observe the Shabbat. So I mean, you could maybe just chalk it up to a semantic difference and maybe it doesn't matter, or it's maybe pointing to a different idea. And it's even bringing in the commandment of God. It says that he's commanded it twice, I think, in this section. And he's also added on the livestock and the servants in this one that was not included to the same detail. It is included in the Exodus, but it's given much more detail here, which seems to be making a point of like, no, this is actually for everyone that's around you, not just for, the head of the house or something like that. And then, we have the difference, and this translation is probably a little different, but in Exodus it says, for in 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but on the seventh day, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, Adonai blessed the Sabbath and made it holy, whereas then we talked about this Egypt situation. So it's both, really, right? There's really this connection in Deuteronomy with this deliverance from Egypt, which is probably part of the reason that it's included here, because it's continuing kind of that theme. But it's also this, like, in Exodus when it's given, they haven't received all this national identity yet. They're just coming out of, Egypt. They haven't fully formed as a nation yet. They're connecting to God as the God of creation. And now they're also connecting with God as the God who has redeemed them as a nation. So it's kind of this, it's kind of interacting with them, I would say, kind of where they are and how God is identifying himself at this point, which doesn't negate the creation aspect. But it's interesting to see that he's using a different identity piece, I guess, in this version or this recording of the 10 words. And the next one is the other main one that has a little bit of, it's not really difference, but has been expanded maybe, is the next one, is the honor your father and mother. So this is verse 16. Honor your father and your mother just as Adonai commanded you, so that your days may be long and it may go well with you in the land Adonai your God is giving you. And later in the New Testament, this is referred to as the first commandment with a promise. Is that if you honor your father and mother, things will go well with you and you'll remain in the land. And in the Exodus record, it just says, so that you may live long in the land that Adonai is giving you. This one adds, so that it may go well with you. So there's, again, this I think also continued encouragement, because they know they're about to face a lot of strong people that they're going to have to overcome, of being like, no, it actually is going to go, you're just going to be in the land, it's going to go well. And so even observing these commandments, it seems particularly this one with the parents, is part of helping it to go well with you. And then the only other kind of addition is that in the final commandment, when it talks about not coveting all your neighbors' things, it adds the land into this, which makes sense because they're about to enter into the land. They're nomadic people at this point. No one really has land or fields of their own. So it's extending this commandment to include that as they're about to enter to the land. So it's interesting. It's like we're seeing, like I kind of have mentioned before, like in Deuteronomy, we're seeing these retellings very much focused on where they're going next, right? It's very much setting them up, and everything that's kind of, for the most part, any new commandments or additions to commandments or things like that have specifically to do with the fact that they're going to be entering into the land. So it's very much with a goal in mind how this is being told. Moses is trying to do everything he can to remind the people of what the Lord has said and what the Lord has done, so that they're ready to go into the next thing, into the promised land. Yeah.
So do you feel like the land, that little addition of the land also has to do with, since they're dividing it in tribally, that somebody from Reuben tribe doesn't go, hey, I like Simeon's land better, because we have that defining of even
Right.
with the daughters that you have to marry somebody within this. So don't want to take
Yeah.
your brother's land because, hey, that looks better for my crops than the
Right.
portion that the Lord gave me,
Yeah.
type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it very much has to do with that. And also with the land, which is why which is something that plays into when it talks about, like, even their disobedience means that they'll be cast out of the land. It's like they are inheriting the land that has been promised to them, but whose land is it actually?
The Lord's.
The Lord's. Right? And so it's like if they're not honoring the Lord, they don't get to keep the land. So the land is like a particularly, it's an interesting thing. We'll have to talk more about that another time. But the land has this specific place, and it's significant in the midst of all of these instructions and in the midst of everything that the land itself is not. So yeah, they're not supposed to be. So then coveting their neighbor's allotted piece of land that they have been given by the Lord is a big deal, and all these things. And so, because the land is the Lord's, and so He gets to decide how it's used. So the land is an interesting topic. All right. Well, thanks everybody for participating in our discussion this morning. So I will pray to close us out, and we can go to service. So Lord, we thank you again for Shabbat. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the Torah, for this foundational revelation that helps us understand everything that comes after it, including Yeshua and the kingdom of God. So Lord, we ask that you would just continue to reveal your character to us through the word and through each other, Lord. And so Lord, we just ask for your presence in service. We ask that you would be with everyone who is serving and leading today, and that we would just follow you together to bring you the most glory. Hashem Yeshua. Amen.
Thank you.